At precisely 3 in the afternoon, as the bleak snowflakes of a Boston winter began to blanket the freshly filled grave of his wife, Robert Sterling, a seasoned forensic accountant, stood amidst the disarray of his wife's home office when a fragile sheet of cream-colored paper accidentally slipped out from an old file folder. He would never forget that moment. Jason, his only son, saw his face drain of color, his hands trembling as he crumpled the paper and hurriedly tossed it into the trash can, his voice cracking as he said, "It is just worthless trash, Dad." But the professional instinct of a lifetime spent hunting down financial fraud urged Robert to retrieve that piece of trash and take it to First Republic Bank. And then, the aging father's entire world crumbled completely when the manager looked him straight in the eye and said, "Robert, you need to call the police immediately." As it turned out, the paper Jason had discarded was not worthless at all. It held a secret fortune of over $3,200,000 and was the damning evidence of 7 years of lies and ruthless betrayal that his own flesh and blood had hidden behind the couple's backs. Samuel Henderson's office at First Republic Bank was submerged in a stifling silence that stood in stark contrast to the frantic howling of the snowstorm raging outside the tempered glass window as Robert Sterling sat there on the plum-colored leather chair with his aged hands still tightly clutching the cream-colored paper that only 1 hour ago his son had called trash. He repeated the words of the manager with a voice as hoarse as sandpaper rubbing against wood, asking why he must call the police to arrest his own family when Samuel Henderson, a man of about 50 years with a composed demeanor, took off his reading glasses and pushed a thick file folder forward, then explained that Eleanor had not only left behind money, but she had left behind a crime scene. Robert looked down at the bold number printed at the bottom of the certificate of deposit valued at $3,245,670 and felt as though the room were spinning around him because it seemed so utterly absurd compared to the simple librarian life of his wife. But Samuel immediately explained that the money came from the fact that she had sold a piece of ancestral land in the Berkshires in the year 2016 and had requested it be locked in a special trust account with a life or death clause stating that no one was permitted access except for herself. When Robert wondered aloud why his wife had not told him, then Samuel flipped to the next page of the file to reveal a statement of access history with glaring red lines of text announcing withdrawal requests that had been denied in March of the year 2019, accompanied by a legal document which was a power of attorney declaring that Eleanor had lost her civil capacity and demanding control over the entire estate to cover medical expenses. Robert picked up the paper, and a name in the section for the authorized agent struck his eyes with a familiarity that was heartbreakingly painful, for it was Jason Robert Sterling, and beneath it lay Eleanor's signature, but driven by a professional habit ingrained in his blood for 40 years. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest and withdrew a small brass magnifying glass, an inseparable companion, to scrutinize the document. Under the lens magnifying 10 times, the naked truth was revealed as the ink strokes were not continuous, showing tiny microscopic pauses and signs of clumsy tracing at the final hook of the letter G, causing Robert to realize immediately that this was the handiwork of Jason, identical to the times he had forged signatures on his high school report cards. He lowered the magnifying glass as a wave of nausea rose in his throat upon realizing that the son he had just embraced and comforted this very morning had attempted to seize his own mother's assets 5 years ago. Samuel revealed that they had successfully intercepted that attempt and that Eleanor had pleaded with them not to involve the authorities in order to grant her son one final chance of redemption, but she had also left behind a pale green envelope with strict instructions that it be handed to Robert only on the condition that he discover the certificate of deposit on his own. Robert trembled as he accepted the envelope, which carried the familiar and haunting scent of lavender, and inside he found an old library card with an address scrawled on the back, along with a directive urging him neither to return home nor to call Jason, but rather to proceed immediately to number 1 Schroeder Plaza to seek out Detective Silas Vance and present the file code ES1985. Clutching the card in his hand until his knuckles turned white, Robert rose to his feet and tucked both the certificate and the card into his inner breast pocket, resting them directly against his heart, which was beating with an irregular rhythm. Then he adjusted his coat collar, and the sharp gaze of the old wolf of the auditing world reawakened within him as he stepped out of the bank and plunged into the screaming Boston blizzard to begin his journey of unmasking the ledger of lies. Robert drove his battered old car through the blinding white sheet of Boston's freezing rain to reach the address scrawled on the library card, which was number 1 Schroeder Plaza, the headquarters of the Boston Police Department, a place where the air hung heavy with the stale scent of old coffee and a perpetual sense of tension. When he recited the code ES1985 to the desk sergeant, it took only 5 minutes for a man of about 40 years with dark circles carved under his eyes from lack of sleep to appear, introducing himself as Detective Silas Vance and stating that he had been waiting for Robert for a very long time. They stepped into a small interrogation room where Silas placed a cardboard box sealed tight with tape onto the table bearing the words "pending file" written in Eleanor's meticulous handwriting, which caused Robert's heart to seize in his chest. Silas began to recount how 8 months prior Eleanor had come to this very station alone and in a state of physical exhaustion, ravaged by cancer, to report that she was being systematically drained of her assets by her son and daughter-in-law, but she had issued a peculiar stipulation that the police were not permitted to take immediate action and instead must seal all the evidence until after she had passed away and Robert had discovered the clues on his own. Robert asked in shock and devastation why his wife had been forced to endure such torment in isolation, and Silas looked at him with eyes full of deep empathy, explaining that Eleanor knew her husband's gentle and trusting nature all too well, and she feared that if he learned the truth while she was still alive, he would soften his heart and forgive Jason, or attempt to persuade him to change his ways, which would cause all her efforts to gather evidence to be in vain. She wanted to ensure that when the truth was finally laid bare, it would be an inescapable trap armed with the most irrefutable evidence so that justice could be served in its entirety. Robert reached out with a trembling hand to touch the cold cardboard box, realizing that this was not merely a collection of inanimate papers, but rather the final legacy of his late wife, who had transformed the agonizing final days of her life into a silent investigation to protect him from the very son who was their own flesh and blood. That night, the vast apartment felt hauntingly empty as Robert placed the box of files onto the dining table, the very spot where he and his wife had once shared so many warm dinners, only to open with trembling hands the black leather diary resting on top, which was a notebook he had once thought she used for recording cooking recipes, but which turned out to be the chronicle of a painful internal investigation. Eleanor's meticulous handwriting transported him back in time to the year 2017, when she first detected an unusual deficit in their joint retirement fund, and after silently tracing the trail, she was devastated to realize that Jason and his daughter-in-law Vanessa were gutting their assets through sophisticated drip-feed transfers, which she described as death by 1,000 cuts. What caused Robert's heart to feel as though it were being crushed in a vice was the journal entry dated November 12th of that year, when Eleanor wrote that she had to begin playing the role of a senile old woman because if she confronted them directly, they would destroy the evidence and manipulate Robert, but if she became a harmless, confused old lady, they would let their guard down and reveal their mistakes. Robert collapsed his head onto the table, letting his tears soak the page as memories rushed back like a deluge of the times he saw her forget her keys or call the neighbors by the wrong names, and the times he had held her weeping and comforting her that the illness was all right, never knowing that it was the loneliest and bravest act of survival his librarian wife was performing to protect the family from the wolves disguised as kin. The sallow light of the dining room cast its glow upon the final pages of the diary written in the early days of the year 2024, where Eleanor's handwriting had become tremulous and broken from the physical agony, yet her intellect remained chillingly sharp as Robert read the passage where she recounted her meeting with the oncologist. The doctor had affirmed that she could absolutely prolong her life for at least another 2 years if she accepted an aggressive chemotherapy regimen with an estimated cost of around $300,000, but she had steadfastly refused the treatment, not because she was weary or wished to give up as Robert had once mistakenly believed, but for a reason far more cruel that was written clearly within those tear-stained lines. Eleanor explained that if she withdrew that money from the secret fund for her treatment, then Jason would know immediately that his mother was still lucid, and the boy would realize that the charade of memory loss had come to an end, which would lead him to disperse all the assets as well as wipe clean every trace of money laundering, ensuring that justice would never be served forever. Robert collapsed completely when he read the final line affirming that she chose death to preserve the evidence for him, to save him from the blindness of familial love. The heart-wrenching sobs of a man nearing 70 years of age echoed through the empty apartment as he realized that his wife had traded her life not out of despair but out of a love and a sacrifice so great that it exceeded the endurance of any ordinary human being. The following morning, as the pale light of the Boston winter crept into the apartment, which was still heavy with the scent of old paper and grief, the sharp ringing of the telephone tore through the stillness, startling Robert out of his endless stream of thought. The name Jason displayed on the screen, and Robert needed a few seconds to steady the pounding rhythm of his heart within his chest before lifting the receiver to hear his son's voice echoing with a feigned panic, asking if he had finished clearing away that pile of trash papers from yesterday and if the garbage truck had come to collect them. A surge of ultimate fury caused Robert's hand to tighten around the phone until his knuckles turned white, and he wanted nothing more than to scream in the face of his ungrateful son that he knew everything. But the vision of Eleanor, gaunt and enduring her suffering in silence, arrived just in time to stop him. The instinct of a seasoned forensic accountant surged within him, warning him that he must maintain absolute composure to enter this deadly battle of wits. So Robert took a deep breath and modulated his voice to become trembling and weary, befitting a widower who had just weathered a massive trauma. He lied that he had gathered all that chaotic pile of papers and burned them completely in the fireplace the previous night because he did not want to see anything that evoked painful memories anymore, which caused the line on the other end to fall silent for a split second before Jason's sigh of relief rang out clearly. When Jason feigned praise, saying he had done a good job and promised to stop by later, Robert hung up the phone and stared at his aged reflection in the window pane, realizing that from this moment on he was forced to wear the mask of frailty that his wife had worn for 7 long years to lull the enemy into a false sense of security right inside his own home. The moment the phone call ended, Robert immediately transformed the vast dining room into a strategic command center where he spread out the entire collection of documents Eleanor had painstakingly gathered over the past 8 years, alongside the family financial reports he had so naively trusted for so long. The eyes of the gentle father vanished completely, yielding to the icy precision of a top-tier forensic accountant as he began the familiar task of letting the numbers speak their naked truth. With a magnifying glass in hand, he scrutinized every line of the bank statements and swiftly recognized a classic money laundering pattern executed right under his nose, wherein a series of cash withdrawals were meticulously calculated to remain just under $10,000 to avoid triggering federal currency transaction reporting mechanisms. These small streams of cash, moving like industrious ants, did not simply vanish, but wound their way through strange intermediary accounts before converging at a final destination, which was a mysterious consulting firm whose name he had never heard. Robert felt a chill run down his spine, not from the biting cold of the Boston winter, but from the ruthless professionalism in how the funds were maneuvered. For this was not the impulsive act of a spoiled child in need of spending money, but a meticulously designed financial scheme aimed at systematically draining the lifeblood of his aging parents and legitimizing that dirty money. Robert poured his entire focus into the name VNJ Solutions, a shadowy legal entity registered in the state of Delaware, the haven for shell companies, but armed with the superior investigative skills of a veteran auditor. Along with the clues drawn from Eleanor's files, he tore through the veil of secrecy to uncover the true owner. When the name Vanessa Sterling materialized on the computer screen, Robert felt as though a bucket of ice water had been dashed directly into his face, because while he had always known his son to be a greedy and slothful man, Jason possessed neither the intellect nor the patience to engineer a money laundering scheme of this level of sophistication. All the scattered fragments suddenly locked together with perfect precision to form a terrifying picture as he realized that Jason was merely a pathetic puppet in the hands of his wife, while Vanessa was the true architect of the shadows, controlling every move with the ruthlessness of a sociopath. Robert felt a chill run through him as memories came rushing back of Christmas dinners where Vanessa always sat across from him with a gentle smile and innocent eyes, solicitously serving food to Eleanor, while that very same cold, calculating mind was silently reckoning just how many final cents could be wrung from their two aging bodies. Deep within the thick stack of files Eleanor had left behind, there was one name circled in jarring bright red ink, which was Eric Miller, a former bank employee who had once worked at the very branch where Vanessa had established the phantom account, but who had been terminated in a scandalous fashion 4 years prior. Robert immediately contacted Detective Silas Vance, and together they navigated the treacherous ice-slicked streets of Boston to reach a dilapidated suburb where ramshackle houses huddled together against the freezing snow and where dreams of a better life seemed to have perished long ago. They came to a halt in front of a cheap diner that reeked of burnt grease, where Eric was quietly wiping down tables in a stained uniform, standing in stark contrast to the image of the polished and brilliant financial specialist Robert had envisioned through his wife's notes. Upon seeing the young man, whose eyes were already deeply etched with despair, cower in fear as Detective Vance produced his badge, Robert came to a painful realization that Vanessa had stolen not merely his family's wealth, but she had also ruthlessly destroyed the lives and reputations of the innocent souls who dared to stand in her way, turning them into wreckage forgotten by society. Robert and Detective Vance sat across from Eric in a corner booth of the diner, where the acrid scent of burnt coffee could not mask the palpable tension filling the air. But the moment the name Vanessa Sterling was uttered, the fear in the eyes of the former banker instantly transformed into a burning flame of hatred, compelling him to unleash the story he had kept buried for so many years. Eric's voice trembled as he recounted that fateful year of 2019 when Vanessa appeared like a saving angel to rescue his mundane life with her seductive allure and deadly honeyed words, only to construct a perfect narrative about a frail and senile mother-in-law in desperate need of surgery funds in order to manipulate Eric's compassion and extract detailed information regarding Eleanor's bank accounts. But the very instant Eric noticed the irregularities in the power of attorney documents and intended to report them to his superiors, Vanessa stripped away her saintly mask to reveal the true form of a vicious demon, for she had stayed one step ahead by filing an anonymous complaint falsely accusing Eric of harassment and violating client confidentiality protocols, which caused him to be fired immediately and permanently blacklisted from the financial industry. Witnessing the agonizing pain of a stranger whose life had been ruined by his own daughter-in-law, Robert felt a sharp pang in his chest, yet he also breathed a sigh of relief when Eric clenched his fists, landed onto the table and nodded in agreement to stand as a witness in court, because it was the only opportunity for him to reclaim his honor and force that sinister woman to pay the price for the destruction she had wrought. That night, as the blizzard outside momentarily subsided, surrendering to a terrifying stillness, the doorbell suddenly shrieked at 11 o'clock at night, causing Robert's heart to leap in his chest and forcing him to confront Jason's strained smile and Vanessa's gaze, which was as cold and sharp as a razor, right there on his doorstep. They offered the pretext of stopping by at such an hour to retrieve an old fairy tale book for little Chloe, claiming the child was crying for her grandmother and refused to sleep, but Robert knew full well that this was merely a clumsy performance designed to legitimize a search, for he had not answered his phone all day, causing the suspicion within his daughter-in-law to flare up violently. He suppressed his revulsion to invite them inside and resumed the role of the frail and senile grandfather, while Jason sat huddled on the sofa with a look of restless anxiety as Vanessa commenced her disguised hunt, pacing around the study, opening every drawer and rummaging through the wastebasket beneath the desk under the pretense of searching for the book, but in reality she was desperately seeking the fateful sheet of cream-colored paper that her husband had so foolishly discarded. Robert's heart seemed to stop beating when he watched Vanessa's slender hand with its blood-red manicured nails glide along the bookshelf and come to rest right upon the spine of a worn copy of Accounting Principles, where he had tucked the certificate of deposit valued at over $3 million between the pages, discussing bad debts. Time seemed to stand still in the moment she pulled the thick volume from the shelf, causing Robert to grip the arm of his chair tightly to refrain from screaming out in terror, but then Vanessa merely curled her lip in contempt as she looked at the dry and tedious title of the book before shoving it back into its place, because a pragmatic and ruthless creature such as herself could never believe that a treasure might lie hidden within boring principles of professional ethics. When the door finally closed behind the two greedy souls who left empty-handed, Robert dared to exhale and collapsed onto the floor, realizing that he had just escaped death by a hair's breadth, but also understanding clearly that this game of cat and mouse had to end before they returned once more. 2 weeks following that harrowing night of escape, just before the dawn could fully break, the artificial tranquility of the affluent Brookline neighborhood was violently torn apart by the wailing of sirens and the rotating red and blue lights reflecting off the pristine white snow as Robert sat silently in an unmarked police car parked at the end of the street, witnessing the moment justice was finally served. The intricately carved oak door of the million-dollar villa which his son had proudly boasted was purchased with financial investment earnings, but was in reality bought with money stolen from his own parents, was battered open, and mere minutes later Jason was escorted out by two officers clad in expensive silk pajamas, with a dazed expression, not yet fully awake, standing in stark contrast to his usual air of glamour. When Jason's panic-stricken gaze swept across the crowd of curious onlookers and locked onto the exact location of his father's car, he screamed out piteously, begging for help like a lost child who had suddenly found a lifeline. But Robert only felt his heart shattering into tiny fragments, and then he coldly turned his face away to stare into the void, for he knew that the man sitting in the car at that moment was no longer the blindly forgiving father, but rather the executor of a verdict of conscience on behalf of his late wife, forced to let his only son taste the bitter cold of prison bars. Right in the eye of the storm of the tumultuous arrest, Robert cast aside every shred of private anguish to rush into the house at the fastest speed his aging legs could muster, for he knew he had to rescue the fragile soul of little Chloe before it was crushed by the cruel reality. When a social worker wearing a rigid expression of bureaucracy attempted to lead the 8-year-old child who was sobbing with terror toward an official vehicle for transfer to a temporary foster home, Robert Steele produced the emergency custody order he had silently prepared with his lawyer throughout the past week, compelling them to step back and yield control to her legal grandfather. He hurriedly used his voluminous overcoat to completely cover Chloe's head, scooping her up and pressing her face tight against his shoulder to shield her vision, ensuring she would not have to witness the spectacle of her parents being handcuffed and dragged away like common criminals right on their own doorstep. Robert whispered gentle lies into his granddaughter's ear, telling her that her parents had to attend to urgent business and that he was taking her to her grandparents' house to play, and then he quickly carried her to the car, speeding away from the glamorous yet frigid neighborhood of Brookline to return to the worn apartment in Boston, where only the memories of her grandmother remained, but where at the very least deceit could find no sanctuary. The visiting room at the Suffolk County Jail was awash in a cold white fluorescent glare and the pungent stench of bleach as Robert sat opposite Jason, separated by a slab of thick bulletproof glass, witnessing the pathetic figure of his only son clad in a baggy orange prison jumpsuit. Gone was the arrogance of a man who lived off the wealth of others, for Jason had now completely crumbled, with tears and mucus streaming down his face as he pressed a trembling hand against the glass and began to pour forth a desperate stream of pleas, shifting every ounce of blame onto Vanessa, claiming that it was she who had coerced and manipulated him into committing acts that went against his conscience. But what caused the blood in Robert's veins to turn to ice was not the cowardice of the denial, but rather the moment Jason brazenly uttered the cruel justification that Mom was crazy, Dad, Mom was senile and knew nothing, so I was only helping to safeguard the money for you both, and it was not stealing. That statement, insulting the spirit of the mother who had sacrificed her entire life to defend justice, acted like the final knife stroke, severing the fragile thread of fatherly affection that remained, causing Robert to see through to the rot at Jason's core, which was beyond salvation. When his son screamed, demanding that he withdraw the lawsuit and sell the house to pay for bail, Robert merely stood up, slowly adjusted the lapels of his coat, and looked straight into the eyes of the man across from him with the terrifying serenity of a judge passing sentence, then spoke every word with absolute clarity, saying that I cannot save you from your own self anymore, because prison is the only place where you can learn the value of the truth, before he decisively turned his back and walked out of the room, leaving behind the desperate sound of Jason banging on the glass and officially closing the tragic chapter of fatherhood to open a new path dedicated solely to truth and justice. That statement, insulting the spirit of the mother who had sacrificed her very life to defend justice, acted like the final knife stroke, severing the fragile thread of fatherly affection that remained, causing Robert to see through to the rot at Jason's core, which was beyond salvation. When his son screamed, demanding that he withdraw the lawsuit and sell the house to pay for bail, Robert merely stood up, slowly adjusted the lapels of his coat, and looked straight into the eyes of the man across from him with the terrifying serenity of a judge passing sentence, then spoke every word with absolute clarity, saying that I cannot save you from your own self anymore, because prison is the only place where you can learn the value of the truth, before he decisively turned his back and walked out of the room, leaving behind the desperate sound of Jason banging on the glass and officially closing the tragic chapter of fatherhood to open a new path dedicated solely to truth and justice. The trial proceedings unfolded within the walls of the Boston Federal Court amidst an atmosphere so tense it was suffocating, where Robert was forced to witness the most revolting charade of hypocrisy of his entire life as the two defendants, who were once children within his own home, now turned to savage one another in a desperate bid for self-preservation. Vanessa appeared before the tribunal with a haggard demeanor that had been elaborately stage-managed, clad in a demure navy blue dress which stood in stark contrast to her usual trendy style, and her lawyer ruthlessly executed a sacrificial pawn maneuver by painting a portrait of Vanessa as a naive wife deceived by her husband, who remained completely oblivious to the illicit origins of the colossal sums of money flowing into the company accounts. While the daughter-in-law enacted the role of the wide-eyed victim, Jason's lawyer, who had been backed into a desperate corner, chose the most despicable path imaginable, which was a direct assault upon the integrity of the deceased, as he boldly proclaimed before the jury that Eleanor Sterling had in fact been suffering from profound paranoia induced by the cancer metastasizing to her brain, and that her records regarding the theft were merely the hallucinations of a dying old woman whose mind was addled by the side effects of heavy painkillers. Robert sat in a very first row, clasping his hands together so tightly that his fingernails burrowed into his flesh, drawing blood as he struggled to stifle the fury that threatened to burst from his chest, while forced to listen to those cloaked in the authority of the law invoke the name of justice to desecrate the silent sacrifice and the razor-sharp intellect of his wife, twisting her noble effort to protect her family into the raving narrative of a mental patient. Yet he knew he must endure. If for the moment he would step onto the witness stand to turn, the tide of battle still lay ahead. When the name Robert Sterling was called to the witness stand, he walked with a poised and icy demeanor, completely shedding the image of the frail and aging father to return to his true form as a premier forensic accounting expert, the man who had once struck terror into the hearts of countless fraudulent corporations. Facing the malicious and entrapping questions of the defense attorney, Robert neither flinched nor showed anger, but merely placed his reading glasses on with a serene composure and began to present the complex spreadsheets in a voice that was steady yet sharp, cutting like a scalpel through every layer of his daughter-in-law's deceit. He dismantled Vanessa's defense of innocent naivety piece by revealing that the IP addresses accessing the accounts of the phantom firm VNJ Solutions corresponded perfectly with her personal devices, and he analyzed the sophisticated pattern of transfers kept just below $10,000 to evade federal reporting, which was a money laundering technique that Jason, with his limited financial acumen, could never have devised on his own. Through the irrefutable voice of the numbers, Robert demonstrated to the jury an undeniable truth that Jason was merely the foolish and greedy instrument, while Vanessa was the true grand architect of this entire fraudulent empire, causing the triumphant smile on his daughter-in-law's lips to be extinguished and replaced by absolute terror as she felt the legal noose tightening around her neck, tightened by the very father-in-law she had once so arrogantly underestimated. Just when it seemed that the trial had reached its fever pitch of tension under the weight of Robert's cold calculations, attorney Evelyn Price played her final trump card, causing the entire courtroom to hold its collective breath, which was a video recording Eleanor had secretly made at her lawyer's office a mere 2 weeks before her passing. The courtroom lights were extinguished, yielding to the pale, sickly blue glow of the large screen, where Eleanor's face appeared gaunt and ravaged by illness, with a headscarf concealing the hair that had been claimed by the vicious cancer, yet her eyes burned with a haunting wisdom, standing in stark and absolute contrast to the image of the senile invalid that the defense counsel had so deliberately fabricated. Her voice echoed from beyond the grave, not with a tremble but with a steely resolve that dispelled every slanderous accusation, as she articulated her sanity by reciting the day's newspaper headlines with precision before coldly itemizing every stolen sum alongside the specific dates and times that Jason and Vanessa had committed their crimes. The most devastating psychological blow landed when Eleanor looked straight into the camera lens, as if piercing through the very soul of the viewer, and spoke directly to her daughter-in-law in a tone that was chilling in its serenity, saying, "Vanessa, I know you are watching this, and you have always been smug in your belief that you are clever for manipulating my son, but you forgot one thing, which is that while a mother's love may be blind at times, the numbers in a librarian's ledger never know how to lie." In that precise instant, Vanessa's mask of icy indifference shattered completely as the sociopath, for the first time in her life, betrayed a look of absolute terror and broke down into uncontrollable sobs right there at the defendant's table, not because of any remorse, but because of the realization that she had been completely defeated by a woman she had always scorned as being old and senile. When the screen faded to black, returning a heavy silence to the courtroom, the fate of Jason and Vanessa was already sealed, for not a single juror could turn a blind eye to the irrefutable evidence delivered from beyond the grave by the late mother. After 3 short hours of deliberation, the sharp crack of the presiding judge's gavel rang out, sounding like the final nail being driven into a coffin, as the foreman of the jury stood to solemnly declare both defendants guilty on all counts, including fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. The sentence handed down shortly thereafter was severe, yet undeniably just, as Jason, cited for his role as an accomplice and his cowardly demeanor, received a term of 10 years in prison, while Vanessa, the cold-blooded mastermind who displayed not a shred of remorse, was sentenced to 15 years behind bars, along with a mandate for the complete forfeiture of all assets, including the villa and Brookline and the offshore accounts, to make restitution to the victim. At the precise moment the sentence was pronounced, Jason collapsed onto the table, sobbing uncontrollably like an abandoned child, while Vanessa stood transfixed like a stone statue with a gaze that was empty and soulless. Yet Robert, sitting in the row behind, did not feel even the slightest flicker of triumphant joy, but rather perceived a gaping void within his heart, for although justice had been served, the price exacted was the permanent shattering of a family and an anguish of loss that no judicial verdict could ever compensate. A full year has passed since that fateful trial, and the Boston winter is once again scattering its pristine white snowflakes over the city, but the bone-chilling cold of loneliness and deceit no longer holds dominion within Robert Sterling's apartment. Beside the flickering glow of the hearth, the grandfather and his granddaughter are working together to hang glittering baubles upon the Christmas tree, and the crisp, crystal-clear sound of Chloe's laughter has completely replaced the deathly silence of days gone by, marking a miraculous rebirth rising from the very ashes of the tragedy. Robert had brought the sacred final wish of his wife to full fruition by dedicating the entire sum of more than $3,200,000 to establish the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, a tireless pro bono legal organization dedicated to shielding lonely elderly souls from the scourge of financial abuse and helping them to reclaim justice in the very same manner that he had done. When the charitable work was momentarily set aside, he sat down opposite his 8-year-old granddaughter across the worn surface of the old chessboard, and in a bold move filled with surprise, Chloe delivered a checkmate to her grandfather, then looked up to smile radiantly with keen, intelligent eyes that looked exactly like her grandmother's did in days gone by. Robert gazed out the window where the snow was falling gently, and for the first time in so many years he felt that Eleanor was truly smiling from somewhere very far away, because the ledger of his life had finally been brought into perfect balance between the agonizing losses of the past and the tender hope that was just beginning to bloom. The story of the Sterling family draws to a close, yet it bequeaths to us a lesson of immense depth and cost regarding the necessity of vigilance within our most intimate relationships, because there are times when blind trust is not a testament to love, but rather acts as an unwitting accomplice to evil, and it is only the truth, no matter how brutal it may be, that serves as the solitary antidote capable of healing the wounds of the soul and safeguarding the fundamental moral values of a family. If you feel that this narrative has struck a chord within the deepest chambers of your heart, then please do not hesitate to press the subscribe button and to like and share this video in order to spread these meaningful messages of caution to the community and to grant us the profound motivation needed to craft more compelling content for you every single day. What are your thoughts regarding Robert's decisive actions and Eleanor's silent sacrifice, or have you perhaps witnessed or even lived through similar circumstances in your own reality? So please leave a heartfelt comment below so that we may share with one another and listen to the profound reflections rising from the depths of every soul. In closing, I wish all of our cherished viewers watching this video boundless health, a life filled with joy and happiness, and may every single day that passes be brimming with absolute serenity and peace. Farewell for now, and I look forward to meeting you again in the videos to come.